All right. How are we doing? Yeah. So we reached the middle of the afternoon. Here in Massachusetts, a wave of humid air just kind of like came in and just sat down on top of us. It's just not moving and it's muggy. And yeah, it wasn't easy to stay awake in that circumstance. It was really helpful to have the half-hour blocks. Because sometimes you're just fighting against the backside of a hindrance. Sloth and torpor is called sloth and torpor because half of it is physical, and if you're in torpor, there's not a lot you can do. You just try to work with it. You try to come out the other side. Likewise, restlessness and remorse. Like if you've done something really regrettable, try to not be remorseful. That it's not actually a good thing to do. You know, you need to process it a little. And so you kind of again have to ride it out. And sometimes the scenario for us in meditation, we sit down and we realize, okay, samadhi, we're kind of moving away from it at the moment. And we just kind of want to put the brakes on and consider that success. You know, just try to experience what we're going through without adding a lot of resistance or judgment to it. And sometimes that's a win. Sometimes that's exactly what helps us 2 or 3 sessions later to feel ourselves rebound, to be like, oh, okay, no, my mind, things are starting to pick up. My mind is starting to clear out. There's a hint of a breeze. And then we can be really glad that we didn't thrash around and drink a whole pot of coffee and splash cold water on our face and do this and do that to try to dispel pretty normal human inconveniences. So I say, how's it going? Because it's not a judgment. This part of the day on a retreat, I'd be shocked if you're having fantastic meditation. Let's be realistic. That's not what you're aiming for. So when talking about samadhi, it's good to understand it's not something you get to hold on to. I can say absolutely 100% your samadhi will fall away. That is its nature. We don't stay in samadhi, which is actually very fortunate for us, or all of the enlightened teachers never would have come back. They would have gone off to samadhi. They would have had the good time. They never would have come back into the muck to teach us. But the mind, naturally, the way it works, to be in the human realm, it needs to process things. It needs to make decisions. Some of those decisions are messy. So we will fall back out of samadhi. So the goal is not to reach some sort of stage with the expectation that we're never going to fall back from that. Rather, the development of samadhi is the development of a well-worn path. We want to know the stages really well. We want to be able to know where we are. We want to know where we're going. We want to easily be able to transition through them. The Buddha said this is the mastery of samma samadhi, is when you can move through all of the meditative attainments forward and backwards, where you can go through them, you know, every other one, even, where you can kind of decide where the mind will land. And that sort of control only comes not through, there's no single attainment where you get that. You get that through experience. So what we're doing on this retreat and what we do in the macrocosm of samadhi development is we try to really understand each of the checkpoints in the development of samadhi. We want to become experts at them. And this is something that nobody can do for us. And this is something that not even every Buddhist or even every meditator will do. As I said, it is possible to get forms of enlightenment that don't require very deep samadhi, or don't require lasting samadhi, just a momentary samadhi, a complete concentration on an idea. So the development, though, of samadhi as a resource that we can come back to again and again to give ourselves energy and even happiness in practice. This is something that comes with experience and practice and figuring things out for ourselves. And so what we're doing here, again, you're not setting a goal to get to a particular stage on this retreat even. I could even suggest really just trying to focus on understanding the transition between the stages. Just figuring that out, because if you walk away a bit more knowledgeable in the stages of samadhi, that's going to benefit you for all your meditations to come. Whereas if you really just got the perfect lineup of conditions and zipped to stage 10, and wow, you had this amazing, blissful, bright meditation, but then you fell away and weren't able to get back there, how useful would that be? We're trying to develop this in the same way that we develop any of the path factors. We want them, we want to start at a foundational level. So that, as we add on layers, we don't have to go back and redo anything. So to review, we started out with what I call step 0, which is just the preliminaries. Preliminaries is to notice the 5 hindrances and to settle, to come into the present moment and develop an interest in our actual experience, basically to find a willingness and interest in meditation. And this will come and will almost be a signpost that you just stumble across in the woods. It's hard to get exactly, it's hard to aim for it when you're within the hindrances. But you'll kind of work with the hindrances and you'll get around them, and then you'll suddenly arrive and you'll be like, oh, they're not here. None of the hindrances are here. This is easy to overlook because it's not, again, this is not going to be a blissful state. This is not going to be an exciting state. It's about as exciting as an empty room. But that therein, the wise mind will delight. Because, a busy room, a crowded room, a noisy room, we know the problems with that. When the busyness, the crowdedness, when that is gone, do we notice the peace? That's what we're attaining when we get the preliminaries all wrapped up. We notice that there is nothing obstructing us from applying our mind in a particular way. And we might feel that it could happen at any moment. We want to be attentive, but there's this natural kind of sense. Okay, we can apply our mind to something. We can start paying attention to something because we're not going to be doing it from delusion anymore. Step 1 begins with attention to the long breaths. The goal of step 1 is to have our mind begin to be located in an area. The body is fantastic for this, but if we're using some other meditation object, it will work out pretty much the same way. Say we were doing metta meditation, And we're just thinking, may they be well, may so-and-so be well, may all cats be well. And then suddenly we get an image or a feeling, a knowledge of loving kindness starts to fill our heart. We're going to notice that, and we're going to have a sense of where it came from, what kind of thought led to it. And rather than darting from thought to thought, even if they're thoughts of love and kindness, samadhi will develop if we kind of stay in the region of that one thought. Even if other thoughts of love and kindness are coming out, our samadhi will be much better, and mindfulness will be much clearer, and the state will develop if we stay in one area. So this is what we're doing with the long breaths. It's kind of arbitrary where we decide to be mindful of the breath in our body. Three common places: the nose, the chest, the belly. Doesn't matter which one you choose. And in some ways, it might be advisable to choose the one that's least interesting, because again, we're not looking for exciting feelings or some sort of attainment or some sort of breakthrough. We're looking for somewhere the mind can settle. We're looking for the absence of things that are going to lead us around. And this is the exercise that is what is usually the longest in development for people in the development of samadhi, is just finding the nerve or the urge to stay with it, to keep working on this foundational level. Even if they're not having interesting sensations, even if they're not having interesting experiences, but to see how that continuity of mindfulness in a particular region allows them to be aware of what's going on a larger scope, without having to spread the mind out. They feel that the mind is starting to get concentrated by being located in one area. And say, it's quite natural if we're focusing in just one area, that the mind will get concentrated. That is its nature. And that's why anybody who is a musician or a carpenter or an artist, when they really devote their full mind to a particular task, it doesn't matter what the task is, everything else will fall away. And the mind will converge on that. And it's not exactly what we're doing in this moment, but we're taking advantage of that principle. It is the mind's natural inclination to concentrate in this way. So we're going to use it. We're going to use it. There's an interesting aspect of steps 1 and 2 in Anapanasanti. They're the only 2 steps that don't have the word train in them. All the other 14 steps are framed as a training. There's something that you have to do, because all the other steps will go against this natural inclination of the mind to zoom in on something. But in the first 2 steps, we actually want to use that to our advantage. It's going to help us get away from the hindrances, get removed from them. And it's going to help us sharpen our mind, make it more clear, so that we'll be doing just this task and not 10 other tasks. So step 1 is helping us really calm the body at a much deeper level than just being in the present moment, but calming it by letting it breathe fully. And the only way we can do that is to just get out of the way and to stop following the breath, to focus on the breath in one area and let the body just breathe deeply. And if there are coarse sensations, resistance, to just let the breath work through those. We're not pushing the breath through them. We're not saturating the area. We're not putting our mind in different places. All of it will happen naturally. We just stay with the mindfulness, stay with the breath. Step 2 is very similar in phrasing. The Buddha says, breathing in short, they are aware, I am breathing in short. Breathing out short, they are aware, I am breathing out short. So the short breath can also be called the subtle breath. As I said with step 1, we're not necessarily looking for sensations. We might not get any very clear or bright or obvious breath sensation. And if we set that up as an expectation, then we're going to flounder. Our meditation is going to be very difficult because we're going to be trying to get something that's not necessarily there. We're going to be trying to perceive something that the mind might not be concentrated enough yet to perceive. So instead, the first step, we're just establishing the mindfulness. We just want the mind to be stable. It's the same way if we were trying to figure out what animals lived in this forest. I mean, we could go running through the forest and we could look in every hole and we could kind of climb every tree and poke around. But our very act of doing that would scare away half of the animals. We wouldn't learn that much. The easiest way to find out what animals are in the forest is to sit right here at the window and just watch for an hour. We would see a lot by being stable. In the same way with our breath, if we want to really refine our vision and our understanding of what the breath is actually like, first we have to sit down and start watching. So the development of the first stage of Anapanasanti is to really cement that in place, that the mindfulness doesn't have to go anywhere. Mindfulness isn't actually technically located anywhere anyway. The mind has no location. It's just aware of things. But to say we're going to practice sense restraint and that we're going to limit either the nose or the chest or the belly, and that's where we're going to be focusing. And other sensations might start to pop up, but we're not going to go and look at them, even if they're interesting. And what will happen over time is that the rest of the body will start to relax and it'll become soothed by the deep breathing. And then step 2 will naturally kind of come about. So if we were dependent on deep breathing as a mindfulness object, again, we would start to flounder. So the reality of our breathing is it's not always long, nor is it always short. Sometimes it's long, sometimes it's short. And by short, I mean very shallow, very subtle. A long breath could be said to be where it kind of moves your whole body when you breathe. You can feel the body rocking back and forth, but sometimes in between instances of long breath, there might be a breath so shallow, so subtle, that it doesn't move the body at all. And it's only with very pinpoint attention that we even notice the breath is coming in or going out. The development of stage 2, the short breath, is to know that that's okay. Again, we've located the mind. We've decided what is the range of our mindfulness. And we're going to let the subtle breath start to make itself known. And there's many ways this might come about, but there'll be sense impressions. There'll be a feeling of air moving. There might be a feeling of movement in the chest or the belly, depending on where we're looking. And there'll be a feeling of energy. And that's kind of hard to pinpoint, what exactly it is we're feeling. And it's really best not to try to describe it. The Buddha said, this is a body among bodies, namely the body of the breath. The body of the breath is its own collection of mental, energetic, physical kind of bodies in the whole lineup of our composition. We're not just one thing. There's all sorts of constructions in the mind and in the body, the nervous system, circulatory system, all of this. It's not just one thing. So the breath body is its kind of own thing. And stage 2 is about accepting it on its own terms. Not saying, oh, this must be the feeling of air as it's moving through all the windpipes, or saying, oh, I'm feeling something subtle in the skin. That must be oxygen reaching the cells. Or saying, oh, there's this warmth. That must be the warmth of blood rushing to all of these places where the breath energy is getting to. We might even have like all sorts of energetic ideas, like, oh, well, the breath is a life-giving, nourishing force that's saturating every pore. We can go on these tirades, but when it comes back to it, that's not really describing exactly what's going on, is it? Exactly what's going on is, hey, I feel this kind of tingly sensation. It's not that exciting. And it doesn't have to be. In fact, to be feeling such a subtle sensation is exciting if we understand what's really exciting in the scope of things. If we see this as a development of the mind and a stage of development. Yeah. So it's like stage 1 is taking a very diffuse light, like in this room, and instead shining it down in just one area, wherever it's going to be, and saying, okay, for better or worse, I'm going to be paying attention to this area. And now stage 2 is kind of like just gradually, turning it up, just letting the mind become more powerful. You don't actually have to do anything. Like I said, it's a natural process of the mind. If you're not going anywhere, you're not building any stories, you're not getting stuck on any particular sensations or narratives, you're going to pick up more of the data that's already coming in. More and more. And as that happens, it's going to become interesting in and of itself. So stage 2 is probably a transition point, if anything, in that before this, you're kind of having to convince yourself that paying attention to the breath is going to be worthwhile. It's not the most exciting thing in the world. But right about stage 2, you're going to be feeling very subtle, tingly kind of experiences. You're going to be feeling things loosen and kind of get all, wiggly and nice. And you might find that your mind is actually kind of starting to like this breath idea now. It might be more willing, might be more entertained by it, and go with it. Stage 2 is where if the mind really wants to kind of just kind of soak that in, then let it. The more sensations we can pick up, the better. This is not to say that we're dependent on the short breaths, because the first 2 stages, they're going to kind of go back and forth, and it's kind of like our samadhi practice in general. There's going to be times when it's very easy and times when it's we're just treading water. Likewise, we don't get to choose when we're having long, deep breaths that are kind of deeply relaxing the body and untying knots, and when we're having subtle breaths that are just like air past the hairs of the nostrils. glorious and fine and subtle. We don't really get to choose, but we get to notice how we're going to be kind of shifting between these two stages, and both are going to be developing. And hopefully, as stage 2 is wrapping up, we're getting to a very stable sense of the subtle breath. We're getting to a place where wherever we're looking, be it the nose or the chest or the belly, it's a really and rich experience. We can feel everything that there is to feel, and that when something happens somewhere else in the body, we're not pulled to it. And how could we do? If we're having such a rich experience in the rise and fall of our chests, why would we go to the knee, even if the knee is in pain, is complaining at us? We'd be like, no, the good stuff is going on right here. So, stage 2 is, as it's wrapping up, we're probably dealing with unpleasant sensations and realizing that deep down at their core, they're really just made up of the same sensations as we're experiencing with the subtle breath. That the only thing that makes them a hindrance is when we label them unpleasant. So this is a point where the labels of pleasant and unpleasant are kind of falling off. And we're revealing that underneath is really just sensation. This brings us much closer to a deeper stability of mind. We see that a lot of the push and pull of the mind is based on this identification, saying this is good and that is bad. We're kind of looking closely enough where we can see there isn't much difference between good and bad. A tingly sensation, right here, it might be good. It's like, oh, that's the subtle breath. But a tingly sensation in our foot might be like, oh, that's bad. My foot's falling asleep. If we look closely, we realize, well, it's just a tingly sensation. It's me who's deciding whether it's good or bad. And so what's good ultimately is that sense of interest and not being shaken by an experience, not having to give it a name or a label or a quality or a quantity, but to just be able to experience it. The last thing I might say about stage 2 is we might start to feel that we should zoom in or get very specific and concentrated. We might feel like the mind would get very, very powerful or very blissful if we were to do that. Or conversely, we might feel like our mind has been so charged up, we can just drop this whole meditation shtick and just open our senses wide, experience the whole world and all of its, sensations and sounds and smells and all of that. But this is one of the last hindrances we kind of got to watch for in stage 2. Because while it's natural that the mind wants to concentrate down, there is a point where it's not as useful anymore. There's a point where it becomes what's called micha samadhi, or just worldly samadhi. It's a kind of focusing that can be useful for a particular task, but it's hard to kind of get the mind back out of it, because that is a natural tendency of the mind to zoom into something to the point where it's kind of got blinders on and it's not aware of anything around it. We're not necessarily going for that in samadhi. And stage 3 is going to be where we kind of move against that impulse, but in a structured way, in an appropriate way. So we're going to stay in the area that we've chosen, but we're not going to let the mind get too concentrated. We don't want it down to a few millimeters or anything like that, because we're about to turn the corner and gradually open the mind up to the entire body. But first, we have to kind of get past that hurdle of desire either for a more concentrated experience, which if we've heard anything about jhana, it probably sounds like, yeah, no, I really want, I want to zoom this in as much as I can. It won't work that way. Or to just drop all the effort. Well, if we drop all the effort, we've also dropped our stage 3 or stage 4, stage 5, stage 6. This is as far as we will get. And we might be more open and more aware if we just sort of opened our mind to the world. But we wouldn't have any deeper samadhi. That would be all that we would get. So to appreciate the possibility for development is to try to get it so where we can sense everything within our range of mindfulness and not go anywhere, not develop any story around it. Make this a very stable stepping stone, on the way to deep samadhi. And it will be a benefit to us for years and years to come. Having really understood this, getting to the point where we can sit down, be ready, do step 1, do step 2, move on to step 3. The better we get at it, the more we understand the signposts. And yeah, the more capable we are, the more we have this resource at our beck and call. All right, so that's what I have to say about this particular step. And we are here, I would say, for my own purposes, I think probably the half hour on, half hour sitting, half hour walking has been working pretty well. But I invite you to decide for yourself. So you could do 15 more minutes of sitting, maybe get up for a half hour, do a 45. Really decide for yourself how to spend the next hour and a half. And then at 5, we're going to break for tea time. And just the program will move on at its own pace. So find the way that works best for you to kind of structure this next part of time. And when you do feel like, okay, I've gotten past some of the hurdles in the afternoon, things are starting to work, then stay with it. It's basic, step 0. Get to the point where you're not trying to be anywhere else. And if you find that suddenly you're there, then don't go anywhere else. Make that your 45 minutes. Okay. All right. Things start to pick up towards the end of the afternoon. You start to get your second wind, digestion wrapping up. All you have to do to keep that sort of calming of the body is just not fill your belly full of food again. And then you get to have a wonderful evening of practice. So what we're going to do is retreat time, have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, have a cup of hot cocoa, maybe the little snacky things. We do this even at the monastery, cheese, little bits of chocolate. These things are actually allowed in the evening because they're not really food. They don't fill you up the same way. They just kind of give you something to gnaw on so that you don't gnaw on a piece of chicken and regret it for the rest of the night. So those keeping the 8 precepts, I encourage you just the same as us. We're going to have an hour for just a kind of break, just kind of unwind, get a nice hot drink. And then we'll come back at 6 o'clock for what back in the days of Buddhist Insights Retreat Center used to be a fun little pastime also for unwinding after a long day of practice, is a question and answer session. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask about samadhi or just things you'd be okay, about your practice, asking questions in public, you'll have a chance to type them in the chat, either in YouTube or in Zoom. Or if you'd just like to email them to me, you've got 45 minutes and I'll kind of have those on hand and we'll get through what looks good and we'll skip over what looks off topic. And yeah, it could be a good time. It could be a good, wholesome, good time. Okay, so see you back here in about an hour.